And we're live. Woohoo! And this week we have the amazing Dave the Coach.
Hello.
Coach, you sound like somebody from Thomas the Tank Engine. That's like a character.
that might be my new branding. Might change my profile picture on social media to my face edited onto the front of an engine.
Is he choppy to you, or is he choppy to me? Or am I choppy to you? Oh God, this is the whole network.
He's fine to me. I'm probably choppy. I'm not choppy.
Oh, it must be choppy. It must be choppiness. Must be on my side then. I'm choppy the thing. Anyway,
you both sound great to me. So.
Well, it's me that's Mr. Choppy then. Anyway, we sound like an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine at the moment. So, before you go choppy again on my side, who is Dave the Coach? And is my nomenclature of health coach accurate? Because I just saw it on your LinkedIn profile. So.
Yeah, I suppose it's accurate. So who is Dave the Coach? So I am a healthcare professional of 25 years, worked in A&E nursing and podiatry. Podiatry was both NHS and private business. I set up and ran my own business for 8 years and sold that, and also teaching undergraduate students and podiatrists and helping a friend to set up a charity and picking up a master's degree on the way. So I've quite an experience in terms of my healthcare career. But then 2018 sold my business and decided I was going to move across into coaching. And that coaching started off initially as business and marketing coaching for healthcare professionals. But then during lockdown and a separation from my ex, realized that most of the conversations I was having with people were about life. You know, all of the stuff which sits underneath the business. And I still do business coaching, but most of the coaching I do now is life coaching. So I suppose it's life coaching for healthcare professionals would be close. So health coaches, cool.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit more details about this. So life coaching for health professionals. Why do healthcare professionals need life coaching? What is that?
Well, so I think everyone needs life coaching, obviously, and everyone needs to have me as their life coach for obvious reasons. Really, really very blunt marketing plug. Healthcare is pretty tough, and I'm saying that knowing that every job and every profession is tough in some respects for various reasons. I think healthcare is fairly unique. You've got a lot of people who go into healthcare. It draws people in who are interested in people. And because of that, they're very selfless. They tend to put other people in front of them, and they have a very hard time in putting themselves a little bit further forward. And you end up with compassion fatigue being a huge one. You end up with people who can't say no, and you end up with a lot of burnout and stress. And I've been through that at various points. You know, I've been through the burnout phase. I've certainly been through the stress phase. I'm lucky in that I've moved around healthcare. I've done different things. So I think that's kind of mitigated some of it for me, that I've moved around, and I've got out of the clinical practice as well. Big changes as well in healthcare. I mean, we're seeing in the UK, we're seeing nurses strike. And I never, ever expected in my healthcare career that I would see nurses strike. And when nurses strike, and they're the ones who go, you know what, we don't want to strike. We don't want to put our patients at risk. When nurses start to strike, people should listen. So, you know, healthcare people are definitely a risk of burnout and stress in a huge way. And that's why they need help with these things. They need help just to be able to manage a lot of the day-to-day stuff, to see the things which they can't see because they're busy caring for other people.
I couldn't help but thinking of like one of those terrible TV shows called When Nurses Strike. When you explain that. But on a more serious note, what would you say is the classic situation where a health worker, or just anybody, but let's say a health worker, comes to you and says, I need coaching? What is the trigger point that makes most people come to you and realise that they need life coaching? And are there trigger points before that they really should be coming to you before it gets to that kind of extent of an issue?
That's really good questions. The trigger points that I tend to see is that something big happens.
Yeah.
So whether that be something big which happens to people personally, whether there is, whether they reach the point of burnout, or whether there's a loss or a breakup in a relationship, or some trauma, or a physical injury, something which stops people in their tracks, and they slow down long enough to catch their breath and then go, I need to do something about this. I described it to someone the other day that the universe has a tendency to either whisper, speak, shout, or scream at you. And I think quite a lot of the time it comes down to the universe screams at you. So I'll give you an example. When we had lockdown kick in the UK, so April of 2020, I had a lot of people approach me because they'd stopped working, and they realised that then they got that gap. They realised that there were things which they needed to sort out, and they went, "Who should we go and talk to?" Or let's go and have a conversation with that bloke who's talked about this stuff for a while, but I haven't had the opportunity to listen to him. So there's usually something big happens for a lot of people. The flip side of that is, when you ask about what things should people be watching out for, I tend to draw on my experience around mindfulness and meditation. My backstory is up until 2015, lived with a significant amount of anger, and that was how I expressed it to the world. And it caused, it eventually led to my marriage finishing, and really kind of upset the balance of relationships with my children. And I had to work very hard from 2015 to try and get that back. All the signs were there that it was a problem. I just wasn't able to notice them. And with the mindfulness and meditation element now, you become much more attuned to what's going on in your body. So I know that, for example, if I'm checking my door when I leave the house a little bit too much, it's got nothing to do with the door and security. It's to do with something going on in the background, which I haven't quite brought from that unconscious level through to a conscious level. And it's just that little moment where I go, okay, I need to look at something. Maybe there's something I need to pay attention to. And I think it's giving yourself the opportunity to see those things. Most healthcare people I know are working so hard. They don't have a time to stop and, listen to their body or listen to the sounds or the universe, depending on, where you sit on the woo-woo spectrum. So being able to slow down long enough and actually pay attention to those things is huge. And understand what it means and be brave enough to actually go, maybe there's something needs to change.
Are you seeing more clients since lockdown? I mean, I imagine the whole nurse strike has something to do with maybe not enough nurses, too overworked, not paid enough, all of it in one. Since lockdown, are you seeing a higher rate of clients needing help, wanting help, reaching out?
It's pretty consistent for me, I'd say, because I think it's a very big step for people to contact someone and say, can we have a conversation about this? Yeah, that's a really brave and courageous step for someone to actually step forward and message you and say, I think I need help. That's a big thing. And a lot of people still don't do that because they don't feel that they to ask for help is weakness. Yeah. And what we're seeing, and to reference the nurses stuff, one of the things which they talk about in the press is they talk about pay as being the main thing that nurses are after. Yeah, pay is a huge thing, particularly in the current climate. But there's one thing which goes with that, and it's conditions. Nurses and healthcare workers generally are very, very good at going above and beyond. And to not recognize that, I still remember a department I spoke to ages ago who were very proudly telling me they were working at 110% capacity, to which I went, what? That just isn't sustainable. So we're seeing a lot of things going on, reduced funding, less numbers. They changed the training for nurses and podiatrists from my background a number of years ago. So instead of being paid for, you have to pay for it. So if you're going to invest £27,000 of your money just for the course fees, are you going to invest in a healthcare profession where you'll get a job where it's quite stressful, or are you going to invest in something else where you could maybe tap into an entrepreneurial spirit? So there's more of a willingness, I think, now to talk about these things, and I'm smiling because I'm just thinking about the health and safety policies they used to have in hospitals years ago are now health, safety, and well-being policies, and it's become a bit of a tick box exercise. What we need to think about well-being? Well, I tell you what, stick it on the end of this policy here, put a paragraph in at 7.9, and people will read it, and we've ticked the box. But there's certainly more conversations coming up now, particularly around men's stuff as well, which is quite interesting. So I think it's multifactorial. There's lots of things going on there.
Do you think there's a tendency in health professionals to be more on the people-pleasing side of things, as you were saying, going above and beyond? Do you think that's a problem in terms of the kind of people who end up in healthcare? I mean, obviously, we've probably all had healthcare professionals who clearly aren't people pleasers for various other reasons, but would you say that that's a common issue in the healthcare sector? Because it probably seems to be, if all these people working stupidly long hours all the time.
I think it's, if we look at kind of psychological sort of personality type stuff, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Statistically, and I'm kind of pulling figures out of stuff I've read recently. If we take nurses, 90% of nurses are female, 10% are male. Obviously, other genders will be mixed in there as well. But you've got that kind of 90-10 split, which is quite strong. And from the female perspective, females have a tendency psychologically to prefer people to things. Men prefer things, which is why you get more men as engineers. I think that people-pleasing element probably does come into it, but I would want somebody who actually cares to look after me if I was in hospital. Somewhere like A&E, where I worked, is a little bit more. It's probably a little bit different. You need to get rapport really quickly. Usually, for me, it was telling people jokes. You've only got a certain amount of time, so you have to get in there quickly and get trust. But at the same time, you have to be very practical. That you've got to move somebody in an emergency situation quite quickly. On the wards, I think it's a different personality again. So. Yeah, there is a people-pleasing element, but I think it comes from a place of care. But like anything, those boundaries get blurred. I mean, my mum was a nurse as well many years ago, and she used to talk about staying on the ward until somebody was discharged, and we saw it with the birth of our first, Charlotte. She was. We had midwives who hung around as long as they possibly could to see the birth through. So that there's certainly a connection element in that care, and whether that's people pleasing or not, I don't know. But it probably sits somewhere in that ballpark.
You mentioned a term as you were introducing yourself, and you called it compassion fatigue. It was I had only heard this one other time. It was when I was working in a homeless shelter. It was the first time I ever heard it. And we had to take workshops on it because it was so prevalent that we knew what this was, understood it. But I can imagine the compassion fatigue in hospitals and the healthcare, mental health care. Will you explain to our listeners what exactly that is?
Yeah. So if we take compassion as a concept, I'm a massive fan of compassion. A lot of people talk about empathy. I tend to go in the direction of compassion. And I like compassion because compassion to me, and from a Buddhist perspective, is everyone's got a backstory. Everyone's got things which have happened to them which are not their fault. They can be given a pass on some of those things. I can love them for who they are, but at the same time, if they act like a bit of a dick, I can turn around and say you're accountable for your actions. So it's a really kind of loving space, but at the same time, it's loving with accountability. I think when it comes to compassion fatigue in healthcare professionals, they give so much of themselves that they have nothing left. You know, if we're talking about a battery on your phone, if you have your phone on all day, eventually it will discharge and it will run out of power unless you plug it back in. And the compassion fatigue element comes in when people don't plug themselves back in. They don't go back to the nurturing things which give them energy. We all have a certain amount of energy available to us. Different things will take away that energy. If you're an introvert, going out and doing an event, like a networking event like I was at this morning, will drain you much, much quicker than sitting with a beautiful book, having a nice drink in a quiet cafe by a river. So that compassion fatigue comes from being in a position where you're giving so much of yourself to other people, but you're not either getting something back from others or able to give to yourself.
All right, I'm going to ask a nasty question. Sorry.
Sorry, Tim. I had a backup question. I'm sorry.
Well, you do your backup question. I'll keep Dave waiting until the controversial one.
So one follow-up on the compassion fatigue, because I think it's critical with so many people who are, and it's not just the healthcare, it's also like what you do, life coaching and people working in the mental health care field, that kind of thing. So how do people recharge when they have compassion fatigue?
It's very personal for each individual. I spoke at a conference in May, which is a healthcare conference, And the brief I had was to talk about, what did I talk about now? I was talking about burnout and talking about stress. And it'd be very easy for me to stand in front of an audience and say, you know what, to feel better, you've got to go and meditate in a field, hold crystals, stare at the moon on a Thursday, eat greens, turn vegan, walk your dog. But it's different for each person. I go on stage and speak in front of a group of people. That actually energizes me. I actually get something from it. But I know the trade-off is when I'm around people that later on I'll need to go and relax. I think it's very individual. And I think it's being very closely attuned to knowing what drains you and what works for you. There's a lot for me around, and I talked to some colleagues this week about it, that our well-being is very much an individual thing. We are wholly responsible for our well-being. Apart from, we need an environment and society around us which doesn't challenge that too much, which actually gives us the space to manage our own well-being. But it's a very personal and very individual thing. What energizes one person and gives them, energy and allows them to rest is very different to what it does for someone else. It's quite hard, but having the space to explore that is really key.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask a question now?
You can go now, Tim.
Well, normally what we do, we have a rhythm of a question each, but sometimes either...
You're fighting to ask me questions. It's fine. It's fine. It's nice to be popular.
I think today, if I've heard the news item correctly, is the 75th anniversary of the formation of the NHS in the UK. I was looking at the calendar. What is the 23? Was it 48? I think it's 48. And anyway, it's an anniversary. Now, I was going to ask you a very cruel question, as in, what would you change in the NHS if you couldn't change any of the funding, obviously, because, well, everybody knows they need more funding. But, let's just say concentrate more on the well-being and health side of the NHS and the workers in it. What are the fundamental things that you think could be changed, hopefully without too much expense, that would improve the NHS in its next 100 years or whatever?
It's interesting because one of the things, Christelle, going back to your question as much as anything, one of the things I do to make sure I don't drain my energy too much is look at the news. Yeah. So I know it's the 75th anniversary of the NHS, but I haven't paid much attention. For me, there's so much. I have somewhere in my pile of papers, I picked up a chiropody magazine from May of 1973, which is my month and year of birth, and I got it deliberately because it's like, well, as a podiatrist, chiropodist, I can look at what was going on, and in May of 1973, they had a 25-year retrospective of what was going on in podiatry at that point, or chiropody at that point. And it happened to reference 1948 because that was 25 years before. And they were talking, they posted some articles which were written back in 1948. And from a podiatry perspective, there was a very definite concern that they would not be able to provide care for enough people, and they would not have the budgeting and the money for it. And that was in 1948. So I think there's always been an element of funding and how the funding is allocated, and depending on which government's in, the money goes there or it goes there, and there's an argument. But I think one of the things I would change is I would change the level of bureaucracy which we have within the NHS. And give you an example, when we had lockdown, I looked at going back in to be a vaccinator because I'd got my nursing background, I got my podiatry skills, I'd stick needles in people for a living. It wasn't just as a hobby. But in order to do it, I had to do 20 pieces of e-learning to get through. And I didn't do it in the end. I actually stepped back and said, I'm not going to do this because it's too much time.
Yeah.
For me, it didn't suggest how serious the NHS was about treating that problem. So I stepped back from it, but there's so much wasted time caught up in bureaucracy. Yes, things go wrong. Patients will get harmed. That's the nature of bringing so many people through an organization and the kind of treatments which people have. But every time something goes wrong once, what they'll do is they'll put layers in to stop it from happening again. And it becomes people checking a procedure, and then people checking that the checking's been done, and then you're checking that the checking's been done. And before you know it, you've got so many bits of paper floating around, you're not actually able to give the care. So that's the one thing. Probably the other thing I would change is I would make sure that you're not putting all of the work that has to be done in an organization on one person. So lots of administration was removed over time because people couldn't see the value. Yet, if you have somebody who's very good at administration and you have someone who's very good at clinical care, but you take away the administration and let the clinical care person do the administration as well, it's not their zone of genius. They don't do it well, and because of that, mistakes happen, things take longer, there's frustration, burnout, stress, all of those things. So I'd bring back levels in of administration and people who can actually share those roles. And then the third thing I'd do is I would probably treat the money which comes into the NHS a bit more like private investment. Because I hear so many people turn around and say, oh, well, I don't have to pay for this. And it's like, well, actually, you do through general taxation. So you are paying for it. And the ethos of the NHS, free at the point of delivery, yes, you can get it. But the money isn't really treated with the respect that I think it deserves. And one example I have is that if you get into the NHS and you work in the NHS and you behave yourself, and I use that in it's maybe a loaded term, but you keep yourself working at a level where you don't bring attention to yourself, but you're doing everything that needs to be done, you've got a job for life. But it means that some people can actually slip underneath the radar. And if they worked in a private business, they'd be gone. And I think we've got a lot of people within the NHS potentially who aren't a good fit for it. And that's not to say that they don't care. And there may be, something in that statement itself, which is a little bit triggering for some people. And I appreciate that. But I have experience of people who really shouldn't have worked for the NHS. But the system wasn't able to do anything other than move them from one department to another, and it wasn't good. So those are the three things I'd probably change.
Yeah. Good luck trying to sack anybody in the NHS.
Well, yeah, and 99.9% of the people who work in the NHS are beautiful people who I love and care for deeply. I don't know them personally, but I've got so much time for them. And if I go into a local coffee shop and there are a couple of nurses in there, a couple of paramedics, I'll buy you a drink because I'm so grateful for what you do and I have that connection to it. But I have worked with people who can be very toxic, and there's no way of being able to deal with those people, because as soon as you challenge it, you're in a situation where those people are going, I'm being bullied. And suddenly it goes down a very, very different route. And I think managers are very scared to approach those people and have those conversations. And we need to be able to empower people to have those conversations. I've upset lots of people. I've upset lots of people in your audience now. So to wait for people to start, hunt him down, burn the witch.
I mean, while we're on it, we might as well just make everyone angry across the pond. What would you change about the US's healthcare? No, I'm joking.
Do you know? And it's interesting. It's interesting. I've experienced US healthcare. I was out in Florida back in 2003. I had an ear infection. I always seem to get ear infections if I go into swimming pools in different countries. I don't know why.
Oh, wow.
And I was working in A&E at that point, and I ended up going into an A&E department, and it was exactly the same as the UK. Same equipment, same setup. The only difference is there was one booth between triage and being seen, and that was the one where you gave your credit card. Service I got was amazing, but at the same time, I think where the US system fails is it fails to look after people globally. There's quite a lot of the population who drop out, whose healthcare could be improved massively with something global, but that's not an easy fix. Not an easy fix at all. I'd probably, for me, I'd probably look at, I don't know whether it's still the same now, but an Australian system, which is a bit of a mix. You have a thing called I think it's called HICAPS. Some of my Aussie clients, if they're watching this, will probably tell me off because I get it wrong. But you can get anything you need in the public system, but you wait. You'll get emergency care, but you wait. Yeah. Most people will have an insurance card which pays for part of it, and then you top up. So it's a mixed system. So, yeah, that's a big one. We could be here for days.
Yeah.
How long have you got?
I was half joking because I thought, I wish my country would listen to people around the world more often, because we could get some solutions and ideas. But
yeah,
I always find it interesting that people in the UK and the US, for some reason, seem obsessed with just that there is only the US system and there's the NHS, and yet most of the rest of the world does something different to either of them. I mean, the US system is out of control cost-wise. And also coverage-wise, and the UK is overly bureaucratic. But
I think, and it goes to show that there's no perfect system, because
no, there isn't. Yeah.
People are all different. But I certainly think one of the there's a guy who I follow, who I suppose he is a coach. He calls himself, what does he call himself now? I can't remember what he calls himself now. It'll come to me later. His name's Peter Crone, and how he's a Brit based out in the US, and what he says is that we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. Yeah. We have a system which reacts to what's going on rather than coming to the public health end and preventing. But then society is, certainly in the UK, is very much set up that we drive places rather than walk or cycle. We got escalators and doors which like Star Trek, instead of things you have to open. We don't do kind of natural movement. You go into a supermarket, the cheapest food is the food which is processed and full of sugar rather than the fresh fruit and veg. So there's so many things which are almost setting people up to fail, that we have a sick care system to react to what's going on, rather than a healthcare system to make sure people don't ever need that system. That was me going ranting. Sorry about that. I'm going to calm my rant down now.
No, I think that's an important, and it's same over here in the US. We exactly the same. We're not working to prevent. I mean, you're walking more than we are, to be honest.
You and the US is even more sedentary than the UK is.
Yeah, and you go when you go back and you start. You can almost sound a bit cynical and a bit of a skeptic about it, but you start going back and look at who benefits from the system as we have it, and there will be people who benefit from this being as it is across the globe and not changing. Yet we all know that some change is needed to make things better for us, but that means that some people are going to have to, whether it's give up wealth or give up power or change the way that they work in order for that to happen, and they're big powers.
So now we're getting onto revolution. So
I know I'm going to have to put my tinfoil hat on in a moment, so they can hear me.
I can't remember whose question it is, but I'm going to ask. Let's go back to life coaching in general. So if you had to say one thing that you could recommend to most people that would most improve their life, what would it be?
Oh, blimey, that is a big question, isn't it? What's the one thing which shifts everything? I would say understand your values.
Yeah.
That's where I start with most of my clients is, what are your values? And the reason I say that is when I worked out my values in about 2019, I did it for the first time. It was amazing, because it gave me a real idea about why I made the choices that I made and why I make choices in a particular way now. So I have 4 values: love or compassion, freedom or choice. I'll kind of float around with the words there depending on how I am. So it's love, freedom, learning, and fun. And I can look at every time I've changed jobs or everything I've done in business or every interaction I've had, and it will fit in with those 4 values somewhere. And when I left the NHS, I'd lost my freedom. I didn't have the opportunity to do what I needed to do. I wasn't learning as much as I'd like to, and I wasn't having fun. And so I can look at that. So values is huge. Understand your values, and it unlocks so much for you.
I like that, and I like fun. I think we forget that too often. The fun word.
Yeah. And I can look at fun from my perspective. If I go to an event, when I'm saturated with information, and that's okay, because I start to have fun. I start to play a little bit, and I start to heckle. I'm not a good audience member. When I've got my fill of learning, that's it.
I'm not saying you're heckling yet, so.
No. Well, no, you're keeping me in the right place, so it's okay.
Fun and play. Those are good key words that we need to learn better. Dave, I'm going to ask the last question, I think, Tim, unless you want to cut in.
No.
I'm going to ask you, where can we find you online? Where can people go to hire you as a coach, find you, ask you questions, all of the above?
So I play socially most on LinkedIn. That seems to be the place I kind of really get good interaction, have some fun. So I am Dave James on LinkedIn. If you're looking for me online, my website is davethecoach.co.uk. I changed my business name to match Dave the Coach. It was something totally different before and realized that my website was Dave the Coach, so I might as well call myself that. Email hello@davethecoach.co.uk. And if you really want, I'm on LinkedIn. No, I'm on Instagram and Twitter as I am Dave James. So you can find me in those areas if you want to come and have a chat. And I'm always open to have questions and having conversations with people if they think that my kind of coaching can help them.
Okay, well, thanks so much for being on the show. And
welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. I've loved it. Thank you.
Yes, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the NHS by accident. I've slagged off the NHS on the 75th anniversary. Sorry, NHS. Sorry, Mr. Bevan. I apologise. Well, now you need to put out one of those guilt posts on Instagram where you say, like, how wonderful, like, this baby was cured by the NHS or whatever. I've seen a few of those today. So. Anyway, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for there is a person watching. I haven't said anything, so.
Thank you, Dave.
They just heard that you were criticising the NHS, and now they're going to go around and firebomb your house. So. Anyway, thanks for everybody watching, and we're back next week for a change.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
This is what God requires.